welcome to our online seminar, Meaning, History, and Metaphor of the Waters, which is organized along R&H Space current exhibition, Liquid Homes, supported by Design Trust. I'm today's moderator, Yang Zhang, and I'm the founder and curator of R&H Space. This seminar will be in dialogue with research and curatorial projects dedicated to the waters and places of our territory, tracing their historical and theoretical background and opening up more space for cross-disciplinary discussion. We are honored to have Qu Chang, Law Yuk-mui, and Su Chang as the speakers today to each introduce their own projects, then have a conversation together and answer questions from the audience. Our first speaker, Qu Chang, is an independent curator and writer based in Hong Kong and Shenzhen. She's currently a PhD candidate at the Cultural Studies Department, Lingnan University. Previously, she served as the curator at Parasite Art Space, Hong Kong. And today she will discuss her curatorial projects, which delved into Hong Kong local history from the perspectives of multiple origins, concerning sea-land relationships and migrations. Our second speaker, Law Yuk-mui, graduated from the Chinese University of Hong Kong with a Master of Fine Arts. She's the co-founder of the artist-run organization Rooftop Institute. Using image, sound, and installation as her mediums of preference and adopting the methodology of field study and collecting, she often intervenes in the mundane space and daily life of the city and catches the physical traces of history, psychological pathways of human, the marks of time, and the political power in relation to geographic space. Today, she will introduce her ongoing research project to reimagine migrants and refugees' dispersion journey at sea in Hong Kong and beyond. Our last speaker, Su Chang, is principal of Su Chang Design Research Office, currently teaching at the University of Hong Kong. The work brings together design, research, and action towards an architecture that embraces multiple temporalities in contemporary life. His design method puts particular care into architecture's relationship with the ground, emphasizing the intersection between architecture and landscape to create spaces for new public life. Su Chang is also the project lead of the research for R&H Space exhibition Liquid Homes, and today he will introduce his architectural research on Hong Kong fishing villages to draw attention to the notion of home in the liquid state of mind for Hong Kong sea dwellers. Now let's first welcome Qu Chang to give her talk.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Yang and Su Chang, for inviting me, and thank you all for joining this talk. It's nice to see so many familiar names in the crowd. This invitation actually inspired me to revisit some of my earlier curatorial projects, which really helps me to see a trajectory revolving around the cultural implications of water in these projects. So in my 15-minute presentation, I will quickly walk you through some of these projects and how they have shaped my understanding in terms of the idea of nation, identity, and togetherness. I'll start my presentation. Can you hear me okay? I moved to Hong Kong in 2016 to work as an associate curator at Parasite Art Space. And one of the first invitations that I received was to create a research station in an exhibition called Soil and Stones, Souls and Songs. This is an exhibition looking into the multiple understanding of soil and its connection to nationhood. As someone who first arrived Hong Kong, it became a very difficult task for me. And the thing that I started to look into was this process of food creation, as well as food production, as well as cultural production in the practices of agriculture, aquaculture, as well as horticulture. And I invited artists such as Trevor Young and artistic collective Hong Kong Farms, which is a collective looking into urban farming, to participate in the exhibition. But at the same time, I felt that I still need something more to sort of disturb the concreteness, the fixity of the material of soil. And that's when I started to look into this very fascinating world, a very watery world that is called Gengwu. And this is a very well-known world to, I guess, many of you, which come from this specific genre of novel, the wuxia genre or martial art genre. And in Hong Kong, there is quite a lot of well-known wuxia novelists, including one of the most famous, Geng Yong or Louis Zha Liang Yong. So I look into Geng Yong's novel in order to understand the world of Gengwu a little bit more. And let me show you a video clips. I'll talk during the time I play this video. So the world of Gengwu is a world of martial art heroes. They usually conduct a very nomadic lifestyle. They abide by the values of freedom, chivalry, romantic love, and friendship. They often have a very ambiguous relationship to the central government, the central Chinese government, who they oftentimes despise. They despise the rigidity, the bureaucracy, the power structure of the central government, but from time to time, they also collaborate with them in order to exchange, for example, benefits. But sometimes some of these heroes are biologically related to the central government, or at other times they were simply coming from their good heart and able to, in order to save the poor people. So there's a very complicated relationship that they have with the central power structure. And at the same time, in terms of their martial arts, many of them practice this art of lightness or qinggong. So they render their body into a weightless state, and so that they can walk or even fly on the rooftop or on top of water. So if you look into the cinematic rendition of the wuxia novel, you can see that the martial art heroes are oftentimes associate their body with the imagery of water. They practice their martial art on top of water. And then their relationship with the central, the solidified power structure is also very watery. And from here, I actually see this quality of periphery, that it's in relation to Hong Kong's identity, that it's a region that is keeping its distance to the central power structure, but at the same time, engage in different type of collaboration and exchange, but still keeping its distance. And then they have very different value system. For example, the martial art heroes often value the idea of qing and yi, meaning feelings, emotion, love, and righteousness, while the central government is represented by this idea of law and power. So what you are looking at right now is a video compilation that I created with a young video artist, Zhong Leming. We took film clips from Hong Kong produced Hong Kong produced films based on wuxia novels and put them together into a 10-minute long video clips. Part of the video is looking at this martial art heroes' bodies in relation to water. And the other part is talking about their very complicated relationship with the central government. So moving on to 2017, the exhibition toured back to Hong Kong. And that's when I became fascinated by another set of narratives relating to Hong Kong's cultural identity and the idea of water. They are represented by, for example, Oscar Ho's 1997 and 1998 exhibitions at Hong Kong Art Center, which is a quasi archaeology of this mythological creature of Lo Ting, who is a half human, half fish creature that was considered as the original inhabitant of the Hong Kong island. Or this 2013 article written by a Hong Kong researcher, Seng Yan. In this article, he connects Hong Kong's cultural identity to the Tanka and the Hokkien people, who are both people, and he's connecting Hong Kong's cultural identity to this ocean-oriented identity, which is essentially different from the land or the farming-oriented culture, which is the pillar of the Central Chinese culture. In this way, he's actually fixating Hong Kong's cultural identity to the ocean, to the South China Sea, and to render basically Hong Kong's identity as something that is different from Central China. And from here, I created this research station with two conflicting walls. On one side of the wall, you will see legends, folklores, and stories revolving around both people, and mythologies, origin stories of Hong Kong that is basically rooted in water. And on the other side of the wall, I switch my attention to new territory, to the land struggle, to the acquiring of farmland in the region, and the political economic struggle of the farmers and local residents there. So in this research station, you basically see a dilemma of a sort. So the question that I wanted to pose in this research station was basically, if Hong Kong is like Lo Ting, an amphibious creature who resides both in water and on land, then how can we reconcile this romanticized imagination of the origin of Hong Kong from water, and this this very complicated political and economic struggle that is currently deeply rooted up north in the land, in the farming culture? How can water inform the struggles of the land, and vice versa, would be the question that I'm posing in this research station. I wasn't able to answer the question at the time, so I resorted back to romanticism and mythology. And that's why in the center of the research station, I created this shrine with this big fa pai. And in this shrine, I put together sacred figures and cultural objects coming from both water culture and farming culture, and create this mishmash sites of praying, and hopefully by bringing out this ritual making gesture to summon, to call for a more radical imagination of the Hong Kong culture. This is another rendition of the same research station in Cattle Depot, invited by a Hong Kong-based collective, CNG Art Department. And then coming to 2018, I got to know Law Yuk-mui, who is also with us here today. And I invited her to create a new project for Parasites booth at Art Basel in 2018. And in this exhibition, From Whence the Waves Came, Mui created a very poetic and melancholic space in which she brought together three stories that connects Hong Kong to the ocean waves and to the floating of people. And it is precisely because of this project, my understanding in terms of Hong Kong's culture in connection to the idea of water really got updated. I'll quickly walk you through the three stories, but I'm sure Mui will later tell you more. So the first story, which is basically over here, is the story of a violinist, a Chinese violinist, Ma Si-chong. He's a very famous violinist, I think in the 1950s, famously created the songs of nostalgia, 思乡曲. And during Cultural Revolution, as a practitioner of Western musical instrument, he was prosecuted. And later he escaped China from Shantou, taking a boat to Hong Kong. And after a while, he left Hong Kong for the US for good. The second story revolves around Mui's parents, who left China in the late 1970s from the same departure point as Ma Si-chong in Shantou for Hong Kong, and they stayed in Hong Kong ever since. The last story is a story of a Vietnamese boy, Tom, who came to Hong Kong in the 1980s as refugees with his families. And he was kept in a detention camp for the entire time that he stayed in Hong Kong. So this video about Tom really look at his memory of Hong Kong. And so these three stories put together an exhibition composed by songs, photos, imageries from memories, and also coins, musical scores. And it really mirrors a Hong Kong that reveals or inspires me a lot. This is a Hong Kong that doesn't have one place of origins, but many, because one place of origins often associate itself with the type of self-enclosed nationalist understanding of the region. And these many places of origins actually comes from different directions in the world. They float around, they float along the ocean waves and come to Hong Kong and brings different stories together. And all of these different stories weave together into this landscape of Hong Kong that we know of. So after this project with Moi, we also participated in the 2019 Georgia Biennale. And in this project, we bring Moi's project together with another 2019 Parasite show called Afterwork together. Afterwork is an exhibition focusing on domestic workers and migrant workers in Hong Kong. So we want to, like, as a further step, to bring together stories of migrants, migrant laborers and refugees together, to look at Hong Kong as a place of different origins, of different cultures coming together instead of having simply one identity. And this is the last project that I want to talk about. This is a exhibition called Café de Brasil. It stems from an article that I read in a book written by Chen Gunzhong. In the book, he talked about a gathering place for young intellectuals in Hong Kong in the 1960s and the 70s. This place is a cafe called Café de Brasil. Its location is in today's Harbor Plaza, right by Victoria Harbor. At the time, young people come to the cafe, overseeing the ocean and ferries coming in and out to Hong Kong or leaving Hong Kong, imagining the world and their place in the world. 70s and 1960s and 70s was also the time when Hong Kong started to form a local consciousness, an idea of Hong Kong as a cultural entity. So that was a very important formational time for the culture of Hong Kong as well. So inspired by this project, oh, sorry, I need to also mention the ending story of Café de Brasil. Café de Brasil closed in the 1970s, and its memory has been gradually lost along with those anarchist, internationalist intervention to the Hong Kong society as well as international affairs. And in 2019, under the very fluctuated, slippery social background, I invited a group of artists and artist collective to imagine together about Café de Brasil, or the idea of publicness, of being together, being active citizens. Despite the fact that water didn't play a prominent visual role in this exhibition, nevertheless, its changing, moving, and engaging quality runs through the exhibition, through which we connect with each other via coffee and drinks, chats and fights. And I think this exhibition, or the experience of making this exhibition, brought me to the realization that the public exists not by being one, but by being many. This is the end of my presentation. I want to I quote myself as the ending note for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for Qu Chang for a rich presentation. If the audience have any questions regarding Qu Chang's presentation, please leave it in the chat box and she will answer them later after all the presentations. And now let's welcome Mui to give her talk.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. So thank you for a young introduction at the beginning. And my name is Yuk-mui. And also thank you for Gogo sharing, because I think when she talked about the project we collaborate from whence the wave came, is really already very comprehensive. So I think I would like to more focus on sharing the development of from whence the wave came, especially focus on my recent exhibition, Son of the Excel, which is I see it like the last stage of the latest stage of the development. But however, before talk about Son of the Excel, I would like to give more background information about the middle stage development of from whence the wave came, because in between 2018 and 2020, I do another work which is called T, and also because Son of the Excel is more like a constellation of multiple video from the past and present. So in between, I would like to talk more about T first. T was as you can see in the slide. T is a 2-channel video I did in 2019. In 2019, because of having a group show in Jogja Biennale in Indonesia, I create a video entitled TJI. And T in Sendanese, a language commonly used in the West Java district. It means river. T is also the first free character of the name of the steamship for a sea route called Interocean Line, which run between Indonesia, Hong Kong, and Japan. T is so different from my parent or the Vietnamese boy story who are trying to escape from a communist country to Hong Kong. Oppositely, the Indonesian Chinese were trying to go to China during the peak of the Cultural Revolution. In this video, in this 2-channel video, I actually pieced the memory of different individuals together to reconstruct the sea route, start from the port of Tanjung Port in Indonesia to the former Tim Hwa Trade Railway Terminal. In this video, I especially focus on the scenery and the landscape of the sea journey. And during my research, I find a place called the Seven Island Sea, which is really interesting because when I do the research, sorry, I want to, and you will see this is a 鄭和向海圖 in 1960. 168, and the part I mark in circle is actually supposed to be the Seven Island Sea, and it's already being marked in the Ming Dynasty period. And I find this is a very interesting place because it was said that the Chinese immigrant from the Guangdong or the Fujian province, they have to pass through this area to Southeast Asia. So, and I find the location is exactly is around the area called Paracel Island. Sai Sa Kwando is around that area, and in my video, the monologue is performed by my friend called Jonathan, who is a naturalized Indonesian Chinese who didn't have the Chinese surname. So follow gradually development the project of the Son of the Age, developing the project. Son of the Excel is the latest development from whence the wave came, and comparing to my previous work like from whence the wave came, which focus more on the storytelling. And the latest development is more focused on the memory of the sound and landscape during the journey of tripping. So this is also the very crucial element I used to connect or interchange the work from different period of time. So this is the following is a series of live of my latest exhibition from the Song of the Excel. You will see at the entrance, actually this exhibition really composed of my new and late and the old work. And this is a video which show we show a Yiwu player playing the song of nostalgia, and actually this song as Qu Chang already tell.
Sorry to interrupt。我想問下你有冇轉到個 slide 啊？因為而家好似係一路都喺第一個 slide 度。
I change，我睇唔到。
係啊，可能你要退出嗰個 full screen，跟住係咯，你可能直接咁樣 show 呢度俾我哋睇佢好啲。啱啱就
而家咧？
而家就得啦，而家 OK。
sorry 啊，我 show 多次俾大家睇。You will feel extremely lost because without the visual support. So and yes, and the song of the Excel is combined of my previous work and a new work, and this is one of the video from 2018 from Whence the Wave Came project. We show a Yiwu player playing the song of nostalgia, which is composed by the violinist Ma Chong. And this song is I find this song is really interesting because the Chinese government using this song as the beginning song of the broadcast to work Taiwanese or the Southeast Asia Chinese. So I think although this is a very emotional song for me, but at the same time it is a song of propaganda. So this is when you enter my exhibition, this is the first video you will see. And in my exhibition, I also have 2 new video, which is a sailor who is my friend who study art, but he is also a full-time sailor, and he I invite him to use the ready-made object to bring his the memory of the sound when he hearing when he is working. So and the other new work is a percussionist who played the Dispersion Lam tempo of Hatou Chao Han. Dispersion is kind of a Chinese narrative singing that was very popular in the Pearl River Delta area. So in my exhibition, you will see it is more like a combination of new and old work, and in the exhibition, I did an opening performance. I call it Improvised Cinema, which is a live performance in which material like video, sculpture, or ready-made object, or some archival material are employed in real time. And I see the result of the exhibition, like the consequence of the performance. Actually, Improvised Cinema is my self-initiated term, and in the form of media art, there is a genre called live cinema, which is during the performance, the artist will improvise the soundtrack along with the live video. But actually, my concept of improvised cinema can refer back to 10 years ago, when I have a conversation with a Hong Kong artist, Anson Mark. She, at that moment, she is doing a research and doing a series of interview of Hong Kong video artists. I'm one of the interviewee, and this is also my first time to share my work with the video artist. And she, at that moment, she mentioning about the early state of my creation is more like the production of the early cinema, which is everything like the scene arrangement, like acting scene arrangement happen in the box, which is a film production factory. So I just keep this idea in my mind. So in 2020, I actually did a lot of one-off or one-take video in the studio. And this Song of the Exile is my first time actually doing a performative scene arrangement in front of the audience. So so yeah, this is my my sharing of how from whence the wave came developed, and also although I see Song of the Exile as a terminal of from whence the wave came, but actually I'm actually planning to do something like extension of the idea of the Song of the Exile. Yeah. So yeah, this is my sharing. Thank you so much. This is some images of the improvised cinema. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mui, for your sharing. And I wish we can see some of the image in the beginning. Would you mind just quickly run us through those
No
7
problem.
that we missed?
This is the film still captured from the T, and in the video, 2-channel video of T, I'm mainly focused on the journey. They what kind of landscape and seascape they encounter. So this is one of the shot that they mentioning. They encounter a big wave, high wave, and then everyone just got seasick. And also, this is another. This is when they gradually get on the ship, and there the ship will blow the horn and accompany with the song. Socialism is good. So actually, the Indonesian Chinese is actually having some hope to go to China. Unlike my parents or Masi Chong who want to come to Hong Kong maybe to seek for better economic condition, or Masi Chong is because of the political situation, he just take Hong Kong as a middle place and then go to US. And the Indonesian Chinese is actually really having hope of the new China, which is during the Cultural Revolution. Then they, of course, it's also because of some the influence of the big massacre in 1913. So it influenced a lot of Indonesian Chinese go back to the home, go back to China. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. So now let's move on to Su Chang's presentation. And also, if anyone, I saw Leung Po's comment for Mui's presentation. So yeah, if anyone have any question, please type in the chat box and then they will answer later. So now let's welcome Su Chang.
Okay, thank you. Can you see my screen now? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Yang, for the introduction. My name is Su Chang. I'm an architect based in Hong Kong. And thank you, Mui and Qu Chang, for the wonderful presentation. I really look forward to the discussion later now. So the title of my presentation is Liquid Homes, which is also the title of the exhibition we are now having at R&H Space, curated by Yang. And I'm going to also slightly drift away from the two previous talk and talk about this topic of about the waters from the point of view of architecture. I'm going to share the design research that I'm currently doing with my team about the architecture of Hong Kong fishing villages. So I had the luck to work with a really dedicated team, and we have been looking at this topic of water by visiting these villages that's not really, at the center of the city. So there's a lot of commutes, and we've been going back and forth between these different ends of the city throughout the past 2 years. When the project was first initiated in 2020, it was actually prompted by two situations in Hong Kong. First of all, there was obviously COVID, so Hong Kong became a kind of like a siege city, and it still is. And more and more people are actually looking around at these places that we were not so familiar with before, and start to travel locally during the weekends and holidays, when international travel became very much a luxury. And that also happened to us. We had a chance to really explore and venture into these different destinations that we were not really thinking about previously. And then another turn was that after the civil unrest, and like Qu Chang's word just now, she called it the slippery conditions of Hong Kong in 2019. Many people start to care about our city, and then have to really find a new way to rethink the way we can socially and politically participate in the city's public life, when we increasingly losing the urban spaces that used to afford and contain these activities. And if Hong Kong is still a city that continue to inspire us, we start to think, how can we continue to learn from it, and where can we find such architecture that's inspiring for us in the city? And we start to look around, and we were reminded of a quote from architects Robert Venturi, Dennis Scott Brown, and Stephen Eisner from their book, actually 50 years ago, Learning from Las Vegas. And I'm gonna quickly read their very memorable statement here. Learning from the existing landscape is a way of being revolutionary for an architect. Not the obvious way, which is to tear down Paris and begin again, as Le Corbusier suggested in 1920s, but another more tolerant way, that is to question how we look at things. So for us, we start to ask ourselves how we can, look at the city that we thought we were familiar with, this time with a different point of view, and maybe from a different angle. So we don't really have a method, at least when we first started the project, we didn't really have a clear methodology. So we decided just to go to these places and start to see what kind of observation would emerge when we visit these places where Hong Kong first started emerge as a habitat, which are these places between the water and land. And we selected 3 fishing villages, Gat-o, Boda-o, and Dai-o, and really want to look at before Hong Kong became a city that we are familiar with right now. How were the living conditions for these people? And without a clear method, we actually brought 3 types of medium with us. We start to create our own photo books. We want to make our own guidebook for ourselves, eventually perhaps for other people, and what we call the cookbook, actually cookbook for recipe for architects, not for chefs and cook. So the photo books, we try to capture these villages and try to enter into these villages and look at the houses. We actually borrow techniques from artist Ed Ruscha. These were his photos. Every building is on the Sunset Strip, where he used these panoramic images to document the city as landscape, not as individual buildings. And we started to create our own copies of these photo strips, panoramic documentations of these villages, try to understand them as a continuous landscape. At the same time, another series of work by Ed Ruscha, this time he chose to look at individual buildings rather than the urban fabrics. And then these individual buildings become their own, has their own characters. And then by reading between these individual buildings, these were our site notes and field notes with photos, quick sketches, try to document and analyze these photos on site, how we can start to see this dialectic relationship between individual buildings as objects and the village as landscape. Entering, and then we start to take a closer look at these houses, and we try to ask ourselves, what makes a house a home? And this came with stories, interviews with local villagers, but also start to write our own, say, profile page, you would call it in these days. We try to turn these spreads of books into almost like a profile page of these individual houses on social media. So you have your own nickname. We try to make a name of for these houses. You have your own location. This time we record them with these maps. You have your own biography, just like you would, each of us would have our own one sentence biography on Instagram or Facebook. And then we also try to create their own avatar, their own pro-pic with these isometric drawings capturing on the right. So translating from the site notes on the lower left corner, these quick sketches into some more thorough documentations on the right. So these are some of these images. So what we discover is that by starting to making these pages, at the same time, almost like making these individual profile for each of these houses, we start to inject a sense of subjectivities into these houses. And these houses from inert objects now have their own character. They becomes this kind of individual characters now with their own names that highlight their different qualities. And at the same time, still pointing out their relationship with the surroundings and the village context. So for example, this one is in Gut-ho. You can see how the house started to transform by doubling its extensions from the original house all the way into the water. And each time, if you look closer at our drawings, you will see there will be less and less enclosure from the fully enclosed village house, a Hakka village house, into a shed that's semi-open, into an even more transparent shed with only the roof covering, and even a staircase reaching into the water. And some more extreme cases, this one in Bodao is a house that's completely floating on the water with only connections to the ground with these floating docks and a boat. These are some of the other houses that we've been collecting and writing stories for them. So in the end, to really make it into a guidebook, we also draw our own version of the map and highlighting the relationship between these individuals and the collective. For in this case, that's the water and the shared public street as a backbone of the village. This one is in Dio, I think. Yep. So we then want to also think, how can we then design? So what are the ingredients that these villagers used when they were making these houses? So from homes, we start to look into the things that they were collecting that was part of the making of the houses. So these were the first iterations from 2 years ago. We were actually very much fascinated by the way they used these as found objects and used them really intelligently when they were making and designing in quotes, really just making of their own house. But there was one government notice we found during one of our visits that actually started from 2018, and actually this will end in October this year. that the government start to ask the villagers to report their houses through this what they call the voluntary registration scheme by way of two types of structures. I'm highlighting them here. It's very straightforward. You can, as a villager, you can call your house. Some part of house, you can call them temporary and the other parts permanent. At first, we were thinking, this was really fantastic. The government actually noticed that not all of them should be called Qimgin, the illegal structure, that there are different kind of conditions and different temporalities in these structures. But later we discovered that when you look at the government's chart that the villagers need to fill in order to report, you don't really categorize the temporalities, the temporary versus the permanent, by the way you use it, or by the way it was constructed, or by the way how this house would perform, but simply by their very literal materials. Materials meaning, are they wood, are they plastic, or are they say steel? And then probably they will be categorized into the temporary category if they are concrete or brick. Your structure will be categorized as the permanent. So we find this interesting because in our record during our previous visit, this divide between the temporary and permanent was not so abrupt. There's actually a spectrum. There's a different conditions of use, of different conditions of adaptations and change in these villages and their structures. So it's very difficult actually for anyone to have a clear divide, that either black or white, or permanent versus temporary for these structures. And at the same time, the character and the quality of this sense of temporalities, they don't necessarily be represented by the literal materials themselves, right? A lot of the time, some of the brick structure could be just a permanent and temporary enclosure for some sort of storage. And then sometimes some of these very refined lightweight steel structure with glass and plastic sheet could be used for some sort of like more permanent and stable use for the family. So I want to question it and start to think about how can we understand these houses by acknowledging their different time frame in terms of the use and in terms of the way they construct, but not in terms of the literal materials themselves. And we start to also want to think about how we can rethink this government policy and what we can read into it. I think there were some kind of problems here. And then one is the kind of motive, right? In the government statement and in their notice, government announcement, the registration scheme was actually to provide compensation and rehousing arrangement in case these domestic households would be removed or cleared for massive housing development. But I think this usually happened on the land, meaning usually they would happen in, say, the Northeast new territories when the government are really clearing ways to build this massive housing development, rather than in these fishing villages where the land actually really narrowed often, and massive reclamation schemes were often very difficult to perform. And so the kind of policy and mindset that's inherited from kind of land development from the point of view of the land as also coincide with some of the previous points that Mui and Qu Chang was raising, was actually injected into the kind of development mindset here when it comes to the waterfront rural area or the fishing villages. And then the second question is the kind of reality that was really not acknowledged in this policy, because the kind of registration scheme was first raised based on a 1982 survey that's performed by the government, when they actually perform a massive survey across the entire territory of Hong Kong and record all the squatter structures, what they called, for the city. But when they look at these temporary structures, the squatter villagers they were recording were almost all on land. So when they were recording, and we know this because whenever there's houses that's recorded, you will see the government drawing, painting the kind of the number of the house from the land development record onto the front door of the, or next to the front door of the house. So they actually didn't really record these structures on the water, and not to record the spaces on the boat. So when they would start to record and perform this kind of survey, these spaces on the water were mostly neglected and not really recorded into the government's record. And then I think lastly was this, what we just said before, this oversimplified categorizations, the easy, permanent, and temporary divide based on our habitual understanding of materials as the inanimate, raw, and dull and inert. And if we take a closer look at these houses along the villages, materials often have their own intrinsic agencies and have the potential not to be adapted, but also to provoke new type of uses and imagination. So this is one of the cases along the waterfronts in Bodao village, when the villagers just use this very cheap and simple plastic covering in case of rainy weather, and to shelter the space inside, which is actually making the open platform into a large gathering space with a large, as if it's a large volume of air floating on top of the water. So when we look at these houses, we start to think about what we can learn from these fishing villages, and what just by looking at the architecture, think about how we can learn from the villagers itself. So before we start the discussion, the presentation today, I was talking to Yang with Mui and Qu Chang, and Yang had this question about the subject. What was the subject of study here? And for us, the people are, you can say the people are missing in our photographs and drawings, but we try to transform them and read the subjects only through the architecture. So how can we read the way they perform, the way they live, the way they work, by reading the buildings themselves and the relationship between these buildings and their environments. So I think we also, in this process of documentation, start to clarify that what we are really interested in are these kind of houses with a sense of liquidness. So what do I mean by liquid is that first, perhaps formally, they are both generic and specific. Generic enough to kind of become a part of the village fabric, and could become kind of the backdrop of the everyday life, and then specific enough in responding to the environmental and domestic conditions of the site and the household and their need. And perhaps spatially, we are also looking at these houses that are not necessarily created by solid wall and floors and roofs, but with different conditions of enclosure and openness, 4 different types of living in between them. And especially in these conditions around the water, how can these houses negotiate relationship with, on the one hand, the land, and on the other hand, the sea, and also to understand that the sea will have its own tidal change twice a day. So the house, being something that's not moving all the time, has to accommodate these kind of moving conditions of the environment as well. And lastly was kind of looking at how they are used, how they can afford changes and adaptations over times, embracing different senses of temporalities that the domestic life would need. We were eventually also want to look back at the city we live in and really think about, what we were experiencing right now. Anthony Wither would call it a kind of universal sense of unhomely. So we don't have a sense of home right now, as he would claim, in a modern society. And how can we still create home and make home in this really fluctuating, slippery state of the society today that we are facing right now? And perhaps there's something for the next stage that we want to also learn and look at by going into these villages and look at these houses. To end, I actually want to end with a beginning. I don't know how we are with time, but maybe I just show the first 2 or 3 minutes. This is a 5-minute film we produced actually right before the beginning of this chain of visits and studies. And we were actually inspired by going into these villages and then creating, documenting them, and then recording the stories of the villagers. So what you will hear are stories that through by the interview, but then retold through the voices of our students, and sometimes are their friends and families. So we hope that through this retelling of the stories that was told by the villagers of the conditions that was already happening, so this multiple narrative, we can have our own subjective entering of these houses rather than only looking at them as the objects. So I'm going to share, and I'm going to end my presentation here.
我今年70歲啦，我係大澳出世嘅，幾代都係大澳人嚟嘅。
我姓胡嘅，我今年78歲。我姓黃嘅，今年88歲，由上幾代開始已經住緊大澳㗎啦。呢度住咗40年啦，我有一個漁夫，又有生活。細到而家都係住喺度嘅，到咗退休我都住。我10歲就嚟到呢條村，差唔多70年都有。
我係1979年同我一家5口人一齊搬入嚟薄扶林村嘅，所以喺薄扶林村都住咗超過40年啦。I am a newcomer in Portland Village. I rent this house with my husband and son. 我住咗喺薄扶林村超過70年啦，3、4歲就跟我哋屋企人搬咗入嚟呢度。
我係盧生，喺檀島嶺村咧，由細住到大噶啦。
我今年10歲，我之前咧就住喺大陸嘅，都係大概2年前嗰度搬落嚟住啫嘛。
我就叫鄭叔，我就喺廣東出世，跟住就老豆老母落嚟啦。呢間鋪頭就老豆老母開嘅，開嗰陣時就係62年。
住咗40年啦，我有一個漁夫，又有生活，但係唔可以永遠住喺度，因為風濕。每年夏天颱風嘅時候，我哋都要離開呢條村，住喺城市。雖然我需要常常翻嚟修理，但係似乎呢個係我唯一感到安全嘅地方。我出世到而家都係住喺度嘅，到咗退休我都係住喺度。呢度環境又好幽靜啦，空氣又好，又可以睇到海，咁大嘅空間有屋住。村入邊嘅人我都識嘅。其實村入邊嘅鄰居都好信任我啊，我哋都冇鎖門嘅。你睇下啲雪櫃啊、洗衣機啊，都係擺喺屋出邊嘅，所以屋入邊嘅空間好大啊。橫掂嗰啲雪櫃、洗衣機都舊啦，用咗10幾20年都唔值錢。住海邊就一定有風險嘅喎。我記得喺2018年嗰時候咧，颱風山竹啊，襲港嘅時候，嗰間水浸晒，係因為點解我個房升高咗1層咁多。
我姓黃嘅，今年88歲，由上幾代開始已經住緊大澳㗎啦。我後生嗰陣時出嚟市區做。
Thank you. Yang.
Thank you, Su Chang, for your presentation. I actually really like the video you show at the end because it's actually kind of matching the format you use in your research to describe the houses, like one sentence very precisely to describe each houses. So for these people behind there, like the stories behind, and then each one has one sentence to make this emotional connection with the ocean. So I really appreciate you to share this with us today, because we're a bit running out of time now. So I would like to see if anyone from the audience will have questions for the speakers today. Otherwise, maybe I will make a short comment, on today's presentation, and see if the speakers also have questions for each other, because I wanna depart from the notion Su Chang mentioned at the towards the end, the universal sense of homelessness. Through his research about the boat peoples, and then to see how how their notion of home developed under the process of modernization. And also I can see, like, in Mui's and Chang's project, although you guys use very different styles and methodology in your narratives, but I can see you also touch on the same topics. Like, for example, in Mui's presentation, she used like migrations, emotional memories of hometown to present this pull and push dynamics between one's hometown and oneself. And for Chang and for Qu Chang, she employs like multiple origins to bring out this message of togetherness. So I really appreciate your angles. Oh, we have a question. So for 3 exhibitors, any differences on salty water or fresh water in your discourse? Maybe Su Chang can answer first.
Actually, I remember this was one of our email exchange with Qu Chang and Mui, that although our discussion first started with this old notion of the sea, right? Yang, when we were talking about this at the beginning, we actually really appreciate how, by looking at some of Mui's and Qu Chang's projects, how this topic started to expand. And for example, if you only look at the, to use the word from the question, salty water, right? So if you only look at the geographical conditions, there are different types of geographies that could potentially afford different types of kind of, if you ask me as an architect, different kind of architectural conditions. For example, when we look at these villages, we actually selected very carefully, although they are at 3 very far ends of Hong Kong, they all bear the same name, O, which in Chinese, it means the places when the water, the seawater will curve in to the kind of the ground, the land, and become a kind of natural shelter for people to park their boat. And that's why in these on these islands, or in these places, that these O's as a type of geography and type of landscape becomes where the boat people first choose to move on shore and build their first say set of houses on land. And if you look at some of the other conditions, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but say when Mui's looking at Victoria Harbor, it is kind of like a harbor, which is a very different conditions compared to these O's that it's probably more inland, and obviously it is very important for the city itself, but it doesn't, it's also connected to the sea on both sides, right? If you look at the Victoria Harbor, it has the east end entryway, and then the west side, and then this entryway are marked by these moon, right? Law Yuk-mui and, sorry, I forgot the other one. So they have different connections and different conditions of geographies, and I think eventually lead to different urban conditions and perhaps different social conditions as well. Qu Chang, I think you are on mute. Yeah. Or is it me? No.
You know?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Go for it.
To quickly answer the question, I think I never really depart from ocean or river or lakes. The departure point is basically the city of Hong Kong. And perhaps it's precisely because the fetishization of ocean, both in terms of its landscape or its narrative, that brought me to this examination of ocean. So I guess to take Hong Kong as a departure point, then salty water might be the starting point for me. But gradually, I think I also gravitate towards other type of bodies of waters. For instance, I think earlier this year, I participated in a project by Moy, which is focusing on river, which really brought me to understand more about Hong Kong's geography. And I also moved to new territory 2 years ago, and there are a lot of floating states in terms of people, in terms of animal, in terms of other objects there, which also brought me into, helps me to make the connections between the condition of farming and the condition of not really fishing, but the condition of being on water. Yeah, so that's where I am at. I never really think about or think very carefully about water itself, but water in connection to our interpretation of culture.
I try to answer this question because for me, this question is a little bit abstract because I don't really find it this like Qu Chang, we are not studying about the water itself, but how water as a container to contain people memory or their emotional to a place. And because let's say from When's the Wave Came project, because more of the story is from the 1960s or before the the end of 1970, I think the sea journey is kind of very important journey during the trip of diaspora. So I think maybe this is a kind of sea journey is more like a kind of very important way to traveling from one place to the other place. So I think this is a kind of very natural choice, and not I really want to focus on the story of seawater, but this is something very natural when I look back the history itself.
Thank you everyone for the answer to this question. Actually, it partially also answered the question I intended to ask three of you today, because in the beginning I was like a bit interested in how you stay on track with your categorization of your research subjects. Like for example, why, like how did you stay on track? For example, like in Su Chang's research, he's very clear that he wants to see through the perspectives of both people, so he chose Danka people's houses as the research subject. And for Qu Chang, it's also very clear, but in the opposite way. So she tried to include many, like multiple perspectives to form that narrative. And for Wei, it's actually down the third kind of line. It's more about the memories of home in different migrants and refugees' mind. It's not just like limited to where they really come from or where they're trying to go to. Like they're sharing this kind of emotions. So I think, do we have any questions from the audience, or do the speakers have any questions for each other?
Perhaps a quick response to Learn Paul's comment in the chat box, and then because you talk about in your comments you write about the kind of productivities and in a way agriculture in terms of in relationship to these villages and the landscape, and I think that's totally true. Actually, that's what first brought my attention when I first saw Qu Chang's previous exhibition, Yuk-mui and Su Chang. We talked about it before in Parasites, that I think there's an interesting dialogue. They try to tackle this kind of production of the land, but based on this reciprocal relationship between the land and the water. When they have in the Pearl River Delta, and you try to interrogate this kind of seemingly harmonious relationship and what kind of other structure that would be hidden behind. That was my interpretation of your title. And then when I look at it, I also think about how the kind of production that go back to the salty water versus the fresh water, the production on the land, also a kind of fish-based farming, this time with this freshwater fish in the pond versus the kind of fishing industry, but this time it's in the sea, and that's not based, that's now in the salty water. And also I'm thinking, just to quickly share one of our interesting findings, but it was not included because we don't know what conclusion we could draw, was that in these fishing villages, actually they were also trying to raise kind of not only fish, but raise like chicken and pigs, as part of their economical income. And I think economic income, I think in Bodao, there used to be a pig farm, and they would raise this pig, and they would actually ship them to Kennedy Town, where it used to be a toufeng, kind of, and or even go to the north East Kowloon, when they would sell this pig to the markets. And then because these fishing villages, they're easy to access through water, but difficult to access on land. So they would not take the land to go to these markets. They will actually go to this market by boat. So there would be, from one of the earlier government records, there would this depiction of these pigs on these boats, but not even boats. They just sanban. They just these paddles, and then they were just like sailing through the Clearwater Bay to go across Clearwater Bay to the north side of Clearwater Bay, and they'll be sold to the markets, to the Hoi and the north side of Clearwater Bay. So that become another kind of ecologies that we can't really imagine these days, because we talk about fishermen, we imagine they would just go to the sea and fish, and then that become part of their land. And eventually, actually, they're also deeply connected to the land economy and then the land people. And then just one more point, I'm sorry, I know it's a little bit late, but it is because they have this exchange with the land people, then they start to also want to adapt to the custom of these land people, because in the old time, the land people are more superior, more privileged. So if you look at the architecture, a lot of these fishermen, when they start to continue to build their houses on the land, they will start to adapt to the custom of haka houses, because those are their immediate land people they can get in touch with. And so a lot of these fishing village houses, they start to look like haka houses, and they start to, so the architecture also evolve and reflect the kind of the subjects that's living inside. There's a quick sharing of what we discovered.
Thank you so much, Su Chang, for sharing. Because we're running a bit out of time. But there's one more question. So I suggest if Mui or Qu Chang, if you really have to run, and feel free to do things you want. But yeah, maybe Su Chang can stay and answer this one more question from the audience. So these structures Su Chang showed were built quite arbitrarily, but simultaneously display a strong identity. Did you see different identities through the way how these structures were erected in the different villages or regions? Could you see similarities, or were the structures pure utilizable only?
Thank you. I think that's a great question. I think in a way, you're also asking whether these houses or these buildings could become say pedagogical, right? Can they teach us something, or can we learn something out of it? Or are they just pure, say vernacular landscape? I think in a way, my answer to that was yes, because in the past semester, I was trying to teach a studio on using one of these villages as sites. And I am, thank you, Qu Chang. Just thank you so much. And then when we look at these structures, we were also looking at the houses by way of they were used. So different types of to use the word I was using in the presentation, different temporalities, and how we can start to typologically understand them not by the literal, say, materials, but by the way they were constructed with different conditions from temporary to permanent, and then what are the states in between. And by that, we did have some findings. That's why when we compiled the books, we also try to, I can also quickly share some of the pages. So we actually compiled a book, and we start to look at, in the end, we call taxonomy. We start to understand them and taxonomize them and see whether there's any clue we can draw by looking at them, not only as the arbitrary and random, but there are rules and potential clues we can draw by looking at them. So these are some of these findings we've been collecting so far. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for everyone to stay to this time, and thank you so much for your presentation. And I will thank Mui and Qu Chang later in person. But now I want to thank Su Chang for the very interesting and in-depth presentation today, and also to make a lot of great connection between your research and the exhibition Liquid Homes. And just a side note that the exhibition will run through the 6th of August, and the space is in Taikoo Chui. And if you're interested, can drop by and have a look at the research results of what Su Chang presented today. Sorry, it's just my internet that I didn't turn off my video, but I can show myself now. But so thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.